almost everybody. We're still missing Josh. There's Josh. Everybody's
here.
Perfect. Probably everybody knows what FESCo is, so I won't go into too much detail, but I will note that there's a Fedora gaming talk in some other room right now, so this is intentional to separate out the people who are serious from people.
Can I get out?
If you want to leave, now's the time.
And which talk is which?
Yeah, right. That's a good question.
If we all leave, they can go to the gaming talk.
So there is no actual talk here. The basic idea is a meet and greet kind of thing. So I'm going to very quickly shut up and we'll basically go around and introduce ourselves, and then we'll take audience questions and then dodge behind this as questions come up. So I'm Matthew Miller. I am on FESCo and also Fedora project leader, and I work on Fedora Cloud stuff and basically act as a general busybody in all sorts of things.
Hello, I'm Kalev, and I'm a new guy here in FESCo. I just got elected 3 weeks ago with the special elections. And this is my very first Fedora conference, so I'm somewhat new here, but I have been around Fedora for a long time. And I mostly work on the workstation.
Hi.
Please save your applause for the end.
Hi, I'm Kevin Finzi. I've been on FESCO forever and ever, and I'm a Fedora infrastructure lead, so I do infrastructure stuff amongst many other duties. So, yeah.
Could you share your IRC nicks as well?
Oh, I'm Derek, by the way.
I'm Dennis Gilmore. I work as the release engineer for Fedora and involved in the base working group and all sorts of other bits and pieces. I've been on and off FESCO on the board over the years.
And he's D. Gilmore.
Yeah. And D. Gilmore and IRC.
I'm Josh Boyer. As of like 10 minutes ago, I'm now a certified idiot, according to Ruth. So, thank you for voting for me. Like Kalev, I was also recently elected. I've been on FESCO many, many times over the past like 8 years. When I'm not being an idiot, I work on the kernel, and my nick is JWB.
Hi, my name is Tomáš Hoza, and I'm also a newly elected member of FESCO. It's my first time in FESCO, so I'm getting to know how things work here and stuff like that. And I'm maintaining mainly DNS-related stuff in Fedora.
Hello, my name is Miloslav Tomáš, IRC MITR. I work at security architecture for Red Hat and in Fedora. I'm also on the server working group and currently working on a role-kit.
Hi, I'm Tomáš Mraz, IRC nick T8M, and I'm working mostly on security-related packages in Fedora and Red Hat.
Hi, I'm Stephen Gallagher. I've been on FESCO now for about 2-3 years. Lost track. I'm working on the server working group, and my big projects right now, I'm working with Miloslav on Rollkit. I'm also working on OpenLMI, and I'm mostly heckling Cockpit.
So I guess I have a microphone. I guess we can open up to questions right away. If there are not any immediate questions, I can blather on about what we were talking about before the meeting started.
Okay, I'll read this up for questions.
Cool. Does anybody have any questions?
What's FESCO's position on the EU public license?
I think it's a terrible idea. We have enough licenses, but I don't know if FESCO has a position overall.
I actually took a look at the licensing list, and it is an approved license for Fedora, and that's about the extent of what we can do about it.
So there you go. Ask a silly question. Give
Get
you
a
serious
real
answer.
answer.
This is not the gaming session here.
Yeah, if you don't ask questions, this is going to be really boring.
Yeah. So
Or shorts.
Dennis will have to do some kind of song and dance number, and you don't want to.
I kind of want
That's
to see
a
that.
tackle practice on Josh.
Could we do that actually?
So the thing we were talking about before the meeting started was sort of the FESCo meeting process, which basically we are very ticket driven. There is a track instance where you file a ticket, gets the meeting keyword added, and we go through those every Wednesday at an IRC meeting. And although we try to look at those tickets beforehand, it often is the case that they are kind of working meetings where we maybe have glanced at it before, but we do our discussion and figuring it out at that meeting. We are trying to be better about coming to the meetings prepared for those sort of things, to make them shorter meetings, but they often end up being a couple-hour meetings as we go through issues in that way. So sometimes it takes longer than would be ideal. If you file a ticket, especially right before Wednesday, it might take until the next Wednesday till we're really prepared to address whatever it is. But all that aside, it generally works pretty well, and I think we're a reasonably functional body in Fedora.
We're also, or I'm going to be reminding everybody on FESCo that if you file a ticket, we're going to actually try to reach out and ask that you come to the meeting. We haven't been doing that as best as we could, and I've been yelling at people about it. And now I'm on FESCo, so I have to blame myself too.
We've been kind of passive on that. We've just kind of been assuming that when we put out the meeting request, the meeting announcement with the agenda, that if you see the thing you submitted, we're expecting that you take that as a cue to show up and talk about it. But yeah, I think probably we need to be a little more explicit there.
Well, with the global body, honestly, the best thing is to get the ticket resolved outside of the meeting asynchronously, but that doesn't happen too often, I'm afraid.
Also, I would ask people who are filling FESCO tickets to have actual concrete proposals which FESCO could vote on, if it's possible at all.
Yeah, if the experts don't have proposals, then you get FESCO making amateur decisions in an area they may be qualified to decide on, but they are fairly frequently learning as is necessary.
Yeah, and in those cases, we often have tickets then that go for 3, 4, 5 weeks as we go back and forth with the actual experts trying to figure out a correct solution. Some of that, it would be nice if that could be handled before it got to us. But sometimes, we are the best people to contact those other groups.
So can you guys highlight any recent tickets for those who are not following through what's happening in FESCO? Any recent issues that you can talk about?
Well, they're all public.
Once we close the tickets, they're out of mind.
Nothing juicy at all.
We split the schedule.
Yeah, that's
normal.
One of the big things we do is determine the Fedora release schedule and organize those kind of things. And so right before Flock, we decided that since we weren't having test composes that succeeded, we really couldn't have an alpha release without it being tested, and that if we slipped for just 1 week, it would put it inconveniently in Flock, and if we slipped for 2 weeks, it would put it right after Flock, which is no better. So we decided to slip the schedule for 3 whole weeks, which is a little bit painful, but hopefully we will then be able to stay on track after that. So it's more realistic to actually slip by 3 weeks and then get things done than to pretend that you can only slip a short amount and then fail later. So.
I did think of a recent representative example, which would have been the kernel auditing thing we were just ruling on for the last month and a half, where basically Josh wasn't yet on FESCO, and none of us really had the kernel knowledge to be making a decision there. So we were spending a lot of time, a lot of cycles going back and forth with kernel folks and security folks to make a decision there.
Yeah, but that was actually an example of a ticket that did contain the proposed resolution, and we ended up adopting exactly that. But, there was a ticket where we were asked to rule on a packaging question, and instead ended up following a maintain non-responsive policy. Basically, if you don't ask a question, you are not guaranteed what question we will answer.
So we do have a question regarding cockpit.
Who's speaking?
Somebody in IRC. The question is, there's a distinction between role kit and cockpit. Role kit is setting up services, not applications. The idea behind the roles is they're not applications, they're services, pieces you would use to build a wider application. Creating a WordPress, you're going to need a database. Those components are what we're building with roles. We don't expect or want people to create roles as complete applications.
That sounds like the transcript of my last talk. Those are my exact words.
I was waiting for the question though. It was awesome. I was like, this is the most detailed question ever.
I was getting ready to answer a different question.
I'm pretty sure that was the transcript of the last talk held in this room.
Okay. Thank you, Lucas.
Hi, this is completely unrelated to the previous questions, but I may have been spacing out a little bit while you're doing the introductions, but is there anybody in the committee who's responsible for documentation?
No.
Is there any other committee that has someone responsible for documentation?
Yes.
The docs
Yes.
team. Yes,
There's
there's
a
a
docs team, but I'm talking, I know like this is probably a new question, but like I'm just trying to figure out like how do these things work on the higher levels in terms of strategy and
as part of a release plan, right?
I have an answer for that, which is we are having a discussion about Fedora Governance coming up on Saturday.
Yep.
And one of the proposals there, right now, so the sort of higher level organization in Fedora is the board. This is the technical committee that kind of...
well, you're technical documentation.
Yeah. Right, I'm not saying the documentation is not technical, but it is sort of release focused committee. And it tend to be release-based decisions rather than things that deal with those things.
You don't consider documentation as a part of your release?
No, that's not, so.
Sorry, I made this explain badly.
So
Maybe you should start
with
the release readiness meetings.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go to. So in terms of the release itself, is that even on?
Yes, very quiet.
It's not really working. This one's way louder.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
The camera. Somebody mine. So in terms of the release itself, there's a release readiness meeting where all the various teams, whether they're a committee or a team, it doesn't matter. So websites, docs, RelIng, FESCo sends somebody, QA, all these different teams get together and they have this go, no go meeting basically. Like, are all these teams ready to go?
Sorry. That's a mic.
I didn't know I could squeak that high. So all these teams get together and they try to figure out, are all these teams ready to actually ship a release out the door to the public?
But this is fairly late.
It is fairly late. They do it do they do it for every stage, like alpha, beta? Yep. Yeah. So, during the alpha time frame, it is the best time to start bringing people in because I know it's late, but it's not beta or final. But it is something that probably needs to get
Not
fixed.
in the planning though.
There's not really.
Planning in terms of like schedule?
No, in terms of content.
Oh, so if I can...
Fedora Next.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I see what you're getting at now.
We have like the release. We have the release notes. We have, make sure the website, an install guide, make sure the website has the correct information and documentation. But overall, we probably don't put a greater focus on documentation as we should.
So to try to give more background on this, Fedora is mostly a volunteer organization, and if you start or join volunteers around, they might fairly often leave. So, so FESCo is not organized on any function line. There is nobody here specifically. There's no position reserved for kernel or for the desktop or anything like that. So the only reason that documentation is not directly represented at FESCo is that nobody ran for it or wasn't voted for.
There's one thing I think that's kind of gone unsaid, which is, sorry, I think there's maybe one thing that's kind of gone unsaid, which is that the documentation team actually does kind of appoint its own leadership from within the team. So I believe there's a guy, his name is, I think it's Pete Travis, who is the Fedora documentation lead. And he doesn't work for Red Hat as far as I know. I could be wrong about that, but I don't believe he does. And he sort of serves as the coordinator for the team and sort of driving the completion of documentation. And a lot of the work of documentation is scattered among both some Red Hat employees, some of them from Brisbane, some from other places outside content services, and volunteers. So, just to make sure that people understand that there's not, the documentation isn't just sort of left bit rotting. There are people who are caring for it from release to release, and that stuff does incidentally feed in on the back end to work on RHEL documentation, which is a good thing, just as the way Fedora does for RHEL. So, just in case anybody's under the impression that this stuff is not being cared for by anyone, that's not the case.
No, but in terms of content and collaboration amongst the committees, docs and FESCo or whoever it may be, it's changed. We used to have the features process where people would say, hey, this is this new awesome software I want to ship in Fedora. And FESCo would look at it from a technical point of view and say, yeah, that's great, cool, ship it. That got changed to be called changes. And we did that because FESCo as a technical committee didn't feel like it was one, their place, or two, qualified to figure out which of these 80 features were filed were actually worth presenting in marketing or presenting in documentation and things like that. Because some of them were like, I upgraded the D language compiler. Like 10 people made it like that, right? Not to say it's not good work, but it's not something that you really use to grab a lot of people, right? So when we made this change, it really helped FESCo a lot. We could focus more on the technical content, but as a result of that, some of the collaboration between us and the docs team and the marketing team, and even the websites team, kind of suffered for it. So it is something that we should probably look at and maybe try to help out a little bit more with.
Like in the governance discussion on Saturday.
So,
Say something about the
I was also going to say something about the changes process. So as part of that for your change, there's supposed to be a section for this is what documentation will be needed to support this. And we are not always very aggressive about making sure that that is good, but there's kind of a hook there at least, and we could examine making that more aggressive.
One other thing I'll point out here quickly, as somebody who sat in the docs meeting most weeks for the last several years, with the Fedora Next stuff, going with workstation and server and cloud, we've actually gone out and asked those working groups to help us as the docs team know what do you want documented, what can we do to help that documentation get put together for those three products, so to speak. We haven't got a lot of feedback on those. We would love it if you're focused on server, if you're focused on cloud or workstation. Please help the docs team know what you want documented and how we can help make that process better. Because we're getting a lot of silence right now on that particular topic.
For what it's worth, I don't actually remember seeing that happen at the server group. I may have been absent that week, but hitting us up on the list is probably a better choice than the meetings.
Another question I received. This is actually a question this time. Does FESCo have any, are they planning to make Fedora more friendly with Steam?
Josh?
No. Workstation.
Gaming.
Yeah, there's a gaming thing in the other room, remember? At this time, no. That's not to say that we don't want Steam to run on Fedora. But that's a very philosophical question, and it really gets down to the roots of what Fedora stands for and what we want to promote, right? Again, not to say that we don't want it to work technically, but when the workstation team brought forward some proposals that would make some of that easier to integrate and things like that, the project was very divided and went up to the board and back down, and maybe even back up one more time. But it was back and forth between the two top committees, and it was not shot down, but it was significantly watered down to not necessarily make that a focus point.
I would say that we would like software like Steam to work on Fedora, but we are not going to put it in Fedora. And if it doesn't work, I don't think that we have anybody who is assigned to make that a priority. But if somebody showed up and said, I would love to work in Fedora to make this work wonderfully, and it didn't step on some of the other things that are open source parts of Fedora in order to make it work, I don't think there would be any objection to that. It's just not something that we've, and again, all of Fedora is kind of a volunteer effort, and so we don't, FESCo doesn't assign anybody to work on anything. If we could, sometimes that would be nice, but that's the question.
Stop. Yeah, sorry. So my question is about Fedora 21. Do we really get 3 products, and is it really going to ship like that?
Yes.
Yes, we're going to have 3 products. What exactly they look like and how exactly they will be consumed, we'll probably know next week. Or at least have a much better idea. We still haven't quite managed to get a whole compose together, so as soon as we do, we can look at that and go, is this what we want it to look like? Or do we need to tweak things? And it's going to be an evolving process as the release cycle goes on. And what we ship out with the first test compose is probably not going to look anything like what we end up shipping as the final Fedora 21, but there will be 3 distinct products that interoperate in a pretty good way and share a lot of common bits and pieces.
Thank you.
Yes?
It's you, Paul.
So I guess I have a comment and a question. Well, actually, it's a small question, then a comment, then a question. And I'm just going to keep growing that as I go. My small question is, how many people who are up here, a few of you spoke to this, how many people who are up there have served on FESCo for more than 2, let's say 3 releases? Right, a number of guys. Yeah. So a couple of the folks, just in fairness, this is the comment part. In fairness, a couple of the folks who are up there are on the team in Red Hat that reports to me, so I don't want this to sound self-serving, but I did want to say thank you to all the people who've put in a lot of time on FESCo over the years. It's pretty... you get no jokes. You get no jokes. Damn it, there's another mic.
So I have a comment to your thank you, first of all, thank you. But as you said, most of us are on the Red Hat engineering team, Fedora engineering team. The rest of us also work for Red Hat. I would love to see more people who don't work for Red Hat come up here and do this on a regular basis and a consistent basis. Yeah. There's really no reason you have to work for Red Hat to be on FESCo or really any Fedora committee.
Completely agree. Yeah, and I'm glad you. And so the rest of the time, Josh and I are just going to have a little discussion here in front of you guys, and to make that happen. I very much agree. And my point in thanking you guys is that it does provide some sense of continuity over some of the engineering decisions for the Fedora product. As it has been up to now, right? And now that we have this new product, we have new ideas. So this kind of brings me to my next question, which is, and this may be a question for each of you to answer, is to what extent are you supportive of divergence of the Fedora products, which doesn't necessarily mean all of them being built on completely different bases, because obviously we've talked about having a base around which these products are built. But in order to effectively be a product that does something interesting for a particular set of use cases, set of people who are going to hopefully love and embrace these products and then do innovative things with them and spread them out into the world, to what extent do you guys support them diverging from what Fedora looks like right now, as opposed to just being a different set of packages from one another?
All right, I'll go first. My thought is, and being on FESCo and being an engineer myself, my first thoughts go to the technical problems with that. What we have been pushing for and what we've been trying to maintain is that we aren't diverging any of the sets of packages that we build in the system. We're not building alternate versions of SSH. We're not building alternate versions of systemd. We're all pulling from the same set of packages, and the limited changes that we are making, and we do want there to be differentiation. We certainly want the workstation to be able to behave differently at certain fundamental levels than the server does and the cloud does. But mostly what we're doing there is we're trying to find ways to build the packages such that they'll accept individual configuration and they may operate differently while still retaining the same basic functionality and therefore the same set of tests that can work against it. Because we don't want to grow the test suite. We don't want to explode the set of packages that have to be shared in mirrors, and we don't want to drive the docs team absolutely mad. So yes, the products need to differentiate and they need to be able to do different things, but we're trying as hard as we can to make sure that they are doing that with a common package set.
Yeah, basically I completely agree with Stefan. It's just the divergence should be in basically in the configuration things and so on, but not in the binaries. And
Well, I don't think there is a scale of 1 to 10 for how much they should be divergent. And to add to the purely technical answer, we will have different kinds of deliverables for the products. Live images, DVDs, net installs, cloud images. But in the terms of the code, it should be all shared, yes. And we are trying hard to, though I think FESCo has a resolution on record that we would greatly prefer to minimize the differences, but it's possible that differences would arise and we would have the products differ if it really were necessary.
I agree with this, that the difference should be on the configuration level. There should be as big a common code base as possible for products to share, and if products are better fit for different kinds of use cases than one Fedora, then I support this with great extent.
So one thing I wanted to add here is that the 3 Fedora products aren't really competing with each other. They are mostly pieces of the same puzzle for different, very different use cases. So, and because of that, it makes sense to keep the products somewhat similar, so that, for example, if someone has Workstation installed on their personal computer, and if they want to install a server somewhere, it's easy for them to switch over, so that they all form one ecosystem. And I actually think that's one of the reasons why one of the Fedora competitors, Ubuntu, has succeeded, because they are actually providing the whole thing. They have a server version and desktop version, and people who get introduced to Linux on a desktop system, they are very likely to use the same system on their servers. And I'm really hoping that the Fedora 3 products is going to help make this better for Fedora, so that we can also have the whole story.
Yeah, what they said. Yeah, I would agree definitely with the sharing of packages. One thing that's really important is the users who are not necessarily served by one of the products, or not exactly served by one of the products, still have access to that huge, rich collection of packages that we have. So, you may want to run a server, but maybe you're running some obscure service that there's not roles for yet, or maybe you want to run a different desktop or whatever. That is still available to everyone if the products are still fundamentally compatible on the package level. And also I want to add that there's been some talk of different release cycles for the different products. And if we could come up with a technical way to do that, maybe, but it's very difficult to get these 10,000, 15,000 packages we have all frozen and ready at the same point, and then do that again and again for different products on different cycles. So I think that's kind of impractical at the moment.
I pretty much mostly agree with what they said. However, I think that what Fedora is today and what it's traditionally been doesn't have to be what it is going forward. There's no reason we have to just ship installed DVDs, and so the actual composition of what is Fedora is very open to change, and we'll have atomic trees and Docker images and all sorts of other things in Fedora 21. And maybe over time we actually change the way that we deliver Fedora and what the way that we make it and the way that people consume it, and make it easier for them to consume. So there's a lot of possibilities in doing different things to get Fedora out. At least with the way we have things today, it's impossible to do different release cycles for the different products. Because as soon as you say we're not going to update the workstation things anymore, you're going to get 100,000 users, hopefully, that say, I still want to run this GNOME on Fedora 21, and I want my security updates, and I'm getting some updates for some things, but I want my bug fixed and whatnot. It's just not at all practical to go, well, workstation has a 6-month life cycle, server has a 2-year life cycle. It's unless we somehow can cut packages out, and it's a lot of work and a lot of effort for little gain. But I don't think that we necessarily need to be tied to the same life cycle that we have today either. Maybe we can look at doing an 18-month life cycle or a 2-year life cycle or some other type of life cycle, or have every third release is supported for longer or something. Some that fits the needs of the users. I think that we need to do a better job of listening to the users for what they say that they want, and working to give them that.
Okay, just agreeing with you is going to be boring, so I'm not going to agree with you. No, actually, for the most part, I do agree with you, but I think if you listen to what everybody has just said, it's optimistic yet conservative, right? And I don't think anybody said anything that isn't somewhat conservative. And I think divergence of the products is going to be mostly driven not by us, but by the people working on the products. So if those people want to diverge, and they have sufficiently good reason to do so, it might not be at a package level. To expand on what Kevin and Dennis said, if you want a different release cycle, show it with people, right? And prove to us that you have enough bodies to actually accomplish something like that. Because you're not going to get how many are there? 9 of us? 8 of us? How many are there? 9. The 9 of us aren't going to do it. It's just not enough. So again, Fedora's a community project. If you want to do something different with Fedora, you have to show up and participate. And you don't have to be in FESCo to do that. You don't have to work for Red Hat. You don't have to work for anybody. You can do it in your spare time as long as your plan makes sense. So I don't really have an opinion one way or another whether we need to diverge more or less. I think that's naturally going to fall out from what people want to do. And if it's just us running, well, you clearly hear that we want to kind of stay on the same thing and maybe do a longer life cycle, maybe not. That's not really, it's not revolutionary, right? It's a change because we need to change, but it's not drastic, so.
Yeah, so Josh did the summary statement there, so now postscript, I guess. I would be interested in seeing something a little more revolutionary, but I respect the caution. I think that having some different parts of the distribution move at different speeds is something that could be accomplished, but we need some better technical solutions for doing that. We need to work on that. And I guess I can also give as an example some of the things we're doing in the cloud product, where we're doing things that are more divergent than some of the other things, where the big thing is Fedora Atomic, which is based on this thing called OS tree, which is a very different way of putting together a distribution. So once you have a Fedora Atomic image, which you launch not from an installer, but from launching an image, you have a system that you cannot yum install new things into or remove them from. You can actually use RPM to verify. It was constructed from RPM, so it's constructed from the same packages, but basically there's a different system for managing updates, and it has some nice properties, like when you do an update, you can roll back to the previous one completely safely. So it's got a lot of cool things there. But it's very different from how things are put together before. And we've also made some other fairly, again, configuration changes, but fairly big ones. We ditched having a firewall at all, which sounds controversial and awful, but actually in most cloud environments, you're supposed to use the cloud environment's firewall management. So Amazon recommends turning off any host-based firewall. So we're following cloud best practices there, which is something that with our previous spins process, you really couldn't do because it was too much of a divergent configuration from the normal configuration. And then another thing is the cloud init agent, which runs on the image, makes some pretty unsafe assumptions about the environment you're running that in. If you have that, if you would turn that on your laptop and boot it up in a coffee shop somewhere, someone else on the network could take over your machine because it runs as root and puts in SSH keys and does all sorts of awful things that make total sense in a cloud environment. So we have to diverge in order to do the cloud product at all in that way. But and I think that the divergence will get bigger and bigger, especially as we get into doing things with orchestration, where we talk about this is how you get applications into this cloud image and things like that. Heiko, you had a comment over there? Wait.
Actually, I had a question for the FESCo. When you nicely brought the topic, I was about to discussing about atomic and OS3. There was mainly debate in the Fedora community about RPM and package management, and actually it was more bike chaining. And since now we have a real alternative to RPM as OS3, do you think that's something we could integrate in World Fedora in the next few years or not?
Well,
or should it be limited to limited scope as it is in cloud actually?
Yes and no. I mean, if you don't mind, Steve, it's not a replacement for RPM because it's built from RPM, right? It's more of an end user type thing, right?
In GNU, they use it without being based on RPM.
There's OS tree and then there's RPM OS tree. And RPM OS tree is a wrapper around OS tree that produces those trees from RPM bases.
Right. So are you talking about pure OS tree?
Pure OS tree, yeah. Without RPM.
You still have to use RPMs to build the content.
No.
Well, you don't actually. The answer right now is we have to see where things go in 2 to 3 years because, and I've talked to Colin about this on several occasions. Right now, OS3 really isn't built for that sort of use. It is not a good solution for any place where you would want to add software to it manually because it's going to. We have to figure out how to solve that problem, how to make it malleable enough for a workstation user or even a standard server user to make changes that they need to make on it without necessarily forcing a reboot every time you want to install a Firefox extension, for example. So right now it is not really the right solution there, and it'll be at least 1.5 years, 2 years before we'll actually know an answer to that question.
But it's something that FESCo may agree to discuss later.
Yes, absolutely. FESCo is perfectly willing to accept new possibilities when they arise, but they haven't arisen yet.
I don't think FESCO's ever not agreed to discuss something. It doesn't matter how absurd it's been. That's kind of why we're here. I mean, we discuss things. On the workstation point, I mean, there's functionality that OS tree brings that might be useful, but there's also other technologies that could do the same thing if they worked, but they don't. So like snapshotting and rollback, you can do that with OS tree. You could do it with Btrfs if the snapshot stuff worked and you didn't have to worry about crashing all the time. But OS tree isn't a full solution there because it doesn't do user data either, right?
The OS tree model does serve many different purposes. I mean, I could see that, like a data center that has 1,000 web servers all running the exact same thing, it'd be really easy for them to use an OS tree based thing where they put their tree together and then they push it out to all the machines at once. Then you're sure that all those machines are installed the same, configured the same, going to, you can deploy it easily, you can update it easily. There's a lot of benefits to doing something like that. It could be a very useful deployment model in large enterprise environments or in other different types of environments. You know, someone could come up and make something like, you know, the Chrome OS with Fedora and Firefox, and that could be useful. I don't think that there's necessarily anything off the cards, but it needs people to work on it. It needs an interest, and you know, work out the details, bring proposals forward that, you know, solve problems.
So from the purely technical point of view, I mean, packaging is horribly uninteresting. You take files from one place and move it to another, and people have built it originally with a little shell script. The thing that is interesting about packaging is an ecosystem of tools around that actually allow you to collaborate with other people and upgrade and create the packages and the like, which is fairly difficult to start from scratch, and what you put into those packages, which is a huge effort to coordinate and something that Fedora has fairly strict policies on right now. I think actually that something core to the OS3 model, having a single deployable set of files that form the operating system, is a direction we probably should move on, rather than this puzzle where you can have 500 different ways to build something you call a minimal install, and it goes exponentially from there as you add functionality. But it would also mean a very different Fedora project, because all of the current 15,000 packages just couldn't be a part of the base operating system. We would probably have to split into something. I hate to call an extras, but that's what it would essentially amount to.
So someone asked if OS3 is going to replace RPM. I don't think they are even trying to compete, because the way I understand it, the RPM OS3 is meant to is based on RPM, so that we would still use RPMs for putting together the OS3. The way it should look is that Fedora builders still produce RPMs, and but to the end users only get an OS3 image, and this brings several benefits. For example, one of the big issues with the current RPM model is that updates aren't atomical. If you cancel an UM update midway, you basically end up with an unbootable system or something that you have to fix up a lot manually. And the thing that OS3 would help with is making upgrades atomical. It can basically replace the whole base system with, it can either succeed or it rolls back to the previous version. And this is something that would be highly interesting in the workstation context. We would be able to then ship the base system, which is really the minimal base environment, as one single unit, which is updatable offline. You know, you have to reboot and then do a system update, and then you either get the new system or you stay on the old one. Not like a midway transaction error like you can get right now. And then you would have, on top of that, you would have a separate applications. Those would not come with the same OS3, but you would be able to install them separately and update them separately. So this way we would also be able to define a base platform that the applications can rely on, because they know that this comes from the base OS3 image. But obviously OS3 isn't the only thing that we are considering using ButterFS. We should be able to do pretty much the same thing with ButterFS, so the options are still open. But it would be very interesting in workstation context. Thanks.
Only if it doesn't stop, only if it starts working.
Yeah, exactly. If it works, then it would be interesting.
Fix it. What about Ldm Snapshots?
What about Lvm Snapshots? What about Lvm Snapshots?
I don't know how to, I don't know enough about this to comment. Maybe someone else.
Here. Yeah, you can do that with Ldm Snapshots. I think to some degree we already do in various places, not Workstation itself. But Ldm is useful, but it's another thing in your stack, right? If you have a laptop, you can do Ldm Snapshots, you can run Ldm. I mean, that's kind of the default setup for a Fedora install. A lot of people don't like Ldm. It's just overhead. So
well, the
it's
default install is LVM, but the entire thing is built into partitions, so you can't easily snapshot it. We're not using
right.
or anything, so.
Yeah, I mean, it really, I think for a product like Workstation, it doesn't, as long as it works, it doesn't really matter what the underlying technology is, because for Workstation, you're not going to have some guy on the command line being like, oh, I want to snapshot my thing now. Really, I mean, from a high level, you want something like, you know, Time Machine. You want to be able to grab a little slider and say, oh crap, my system doesn't work, I'm going to go back 3 days.
I think there is work going on in device mapper for a gadget like this that can track what's changing, copy and write and stuff. So
yeah, absolutely, but that's an underlying technology. I'm saying it doesn't matter. We'll use whatever you give us that doesn't suck.
I was going to comment on this.
Yeah.
You're also, I think you're mixing the metaphors a lot, right? I mean, OS tree is really meant to drive cattle kind of environments, right? Whereas RPM is meant to drive more like pet kind of environments. Those cattle might be desktop machines because you want to give them out to sales guys, right? And you want something that's recoverable and repeatable and very similar. Whereas a developer, you don't want to give that kind of component to because you want them to have the luxury to kind of diverge, right? So like Ldm snapshotting or Btrfs snapshotting or any of that kind of snapshotting is more on kind of the pet side of the model, where you want to be able to roll back, or even Time Machine, right? You want to be able to roll back and make sure you can keep that pet alive. Whereas the cattle model is, you know, like I used to work with Pfizer. They would have these quarterly sales meetings where all the sales guys would come in, check in their laptops with the IT department. They would just waste all the machines over the course of the weekend, hand them back to them after the conference was over, and with a brand new machine. So, like, you know, you can't, if you mix the metaphors too much, I think that the tooling gets really clunky, and I would never want to change OS tree to allow for user package installs.
So for the camera, Langdon's point is you don't want to mix metaphors. Really, OS tree is cattle, and apparently Workstation is like Pet Cemetery or something. You want to but it was a good point, yeah.
And Pfizer slaughters all their salesmen every year.
So I hope I'm not asking for something that has been addressed already, but so with the different groups and the products, like where does the line in autonomy go between FESCo and what is up to the workstation, the different work groups to decide upon?
Do you all really want me to answer this question?
Go for it.
Okay. So here's how it kind of came about. FESCo, various people on FESCo came up with the idea for Fedora.next, and the working groups. FESCo said, "Hey, this looks like a good model." So the initial work groups were seated, right? They picked a liaison. That liaison picked the people on the work group, but ultimately everybody reports back to FESCo. So FESCo can override any work group decision, as we've seen with Workstation. There are work groups that don't like that Workstation. That's not necessarily true. I mean, I would like to see a more collaborative process between the work groups, both with each other and with FESCo. And I think we're working on it. I think it has improved. I mean, it helps that, well, I guess now all three work groups have their liaison is a FESCo member, which was kind of the original idea. But I also don't think that necessarily has to be the case always. I think it's really up to the work groups as a group, not just one person, to work with FESCo. But right now they do report to FESCO.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, you should.
It's off, by the way.
I'm tired of holding it.
You know you want it back real soon.
One more question about the release process. Is
rolling release still in the game, or was it rejected completely and abandoned, and will it never happen?
Kevin, you've got the mic for that one.
I'm sorry, we have no more time for questions.
I don't know that it's outright rejected. I mean, if you came to the release engineering talk yesterday, I said that I want to get things in Fedora to a point where the developers are using Rawhide all the time, and it's not a place where kittens go to die. But
it's okay. We'll bring it back.
I mean, but to do that, it needs a lot of changes in the way that we do things, and having really good automated testing as soon as things are built, so that we know, this libc is broken, let's not push it, or this, whatever, this kernel doesn't boot, so let's not push it out to people. This thing has got a surname bump, and there's a bazillion broken dependencies. Let's push it to the side so we can deal with that. That's something that I think we can get to, and that way, we can then make a better experience for users by pushing less updates to stable releases, because we do a really, really shitty job of pushing just what's needed. We kind of push the kitchen sink and the Titanic and everything else, pretty much every day. And so, Rawhide could be a rolling release type thing, where you can be pretty sure that it's always going to work, and that's where the developers should be. So, I think that's somewhere that we should get towards. Whether we call it a rolling release or not, doesn't really matter.
And a lot of the work that the QA folks, and particularly Tim Flink and his colleagues, have been doing on Taskatron may lead to this in the next year or two. There's going to be the ability to plug in new tests, and potentially we're going to look at perhaps gating, dropping into the public Rawhide repo until until a certain set of tests pass, and we may end up using Fedora Atomic to power some of that as well.
Yeah, and I think some people mean different things by rolling release. It's like not a very well-defined term, and I think some people really like that model because they can get always the newest things, and they like getting all the newest things, and they're prepared to always get the newest things at not their demand, at whoever is producing those things. And some people like that model. I've been running Rawhide on my laptop for the last year and a half, and it's great. Everything comes in all the time, and I'm updating all the time, and I'm rebooting all the time. But some people don't like that model at all. They want something that's stable. They don't want a lot of updates, and that doesn't serve them well. But I think Rawhide could be a good rolling release type model for those people who want that. We can make it that more so than it is now.
So I also run Rawhide on my main system and have for a long time. And I think my experience is that probably about twice a year I updated my system and it doesn't work and I have to spend some time recovering it. And really, if you upgrade to the newest release every time, it's basically the same experience, except for running Rawhide, it's a surprise which day it will be, and running the releases, you get to decide. So not much difference. But even if we had more guarantees that it wouldn't actually be broken, you still have, oh look, I've got a new desktop release, I've got my software command line flags changed. Nobody told me that was going to happen. There's no release notes for it. It was just, or if I have to go find release notes after the fact, unless I read release notes every day.
People who do not like rolling releases get that option where they can say, okay, Fedora 21 came out today, I don't have time for that. I've got this meeting and I got to go to this other thing, but maybe next weekend I'll set aside some time to deal with that. Whereas a rolling release person, hey, here's the new LibreOffice, and if it broke something, well, you'll just have to downgrade it or figure out how to deal with it, and it's not on your schedule, even if you have a presentation like the next day. So it just depends on what you want as a consumer.
One of the things I'd like to focus on is a very smooth transition from one release to the next, which we've been working on more and more, but it would be very nice if we could do some automated testing of upgrades and make it so that when we put out a release, we're very confident that we can just have a little checkbox in everybody's current release that says, hey, new release available, click here to install, and like your Mac OS does, it downloads it in the background, you reboot, you've got a new release, there was no fuss. You may have a slightly different interface, but you're expecting it, and hopefully things are nice and shiny, and it feels like you've got something
new, and it's not a scary process to stay on the newest thing, because really it's to everybody's benefit if you do stay on the newest thing. So I guess we've got, is that clock up there right? 4 more minutes here? So I guess one more question from somebody.
I just have a follow-up about the docs. There's going to be a documentation.
Yeah, awesome. That's a good reaction.
I just wanted to say that there's going to be a documentation headfest tomorrow, and many of the docs team are going to be there. So if anybody's got any input on where the docs should go, and that's probably the best place to go and to voice your concerns and whatever.
Cool, thanks.
Any remaining questions?
Oh, wrap it up.
Yeah, Miro says we're done.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming, and please feel free to talk to any of us about anything at any time. Don't wait for some sort of contrived panel situation.
Anything that doesn't involve medical advice.
Doesn't involve medical advice.